On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
This is Bonjour Chai, the Is Trump the New Achashverosh edition. I'm Avi Feingold, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltzbovi. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we talk about the case of Mahmoud Khalil. He has become a hero to the left and free speech advocates everywhere. We want to know what that means, and we discuss the encampments in hindsight and how we see them through the long lens of a few months of history. When you get this, by the time you're listening to this, it is Purim or it is past. Today we're recording on the Fast of Esther, but tonight it'll be Purim. That's on my mind. That's what I've been in focus all week, writing the Purim spiel and performing in it tonight and having fun with that.
What does that involve?
Well, it's the time when you get to skewer everybody in the congregation a little bit, take them down a notch, have fun with it. We're doing like a weekend update style newscast, and we're calling out different things that we're seeing in the congregation. It should be fun. A fun time will be had by all. Many congregations do Purim spiels.
Are you going to dress up?
I'm not a dress up kind of guy. I always have some tricks up my sleeve, and I'll figure something out, put on a fun suit of some kind or another. Many people are seeing what we are talking about today as a modern day Haman, the one who is to be reviled and is out to get all the Jews. But I do believe that it is a little more nuanced than that.
Do you mean Donald Trump?
No.
Who do you mean?
Donald Trump is clearly the Achashverosh in the story, the person who is ostensibly pulling the strings and on top, but is really a little bit bumbling and capricious and just goes where his heart desires. I do mean Mahmoud Khalil, who I believe you did write a column about. Can you inform us what is the brouhaha around Mahmoud Khalil and why we should care?
So basically, Khalil, whose name I am not able to pronounce as well as you are. Khalil. He is a Palestinian with a green card to the U.S. This is important for our story, who was a student at Columbia University, graduated from Columbia University, and was active in the encampment protests there. The Trump administration in the U.S. is cracking down on what it calls campus anti-Semitism by basically defunding universities and saying that they're going to get rid of green card holders. They're going to get rid of the green cards, not necessarily the green card holders not necessarily getting rid of them as human beings, but perhaps deporting them if they are involved in anti-American activities such as encampment protests at universities. Now, this particular case has become very dramatic because generally, you cannot just deport somebody with a green card without due process. This isn't a thing. And the legal specifics of this, whether this is actually allowable, are at best questionable, right? So that's why this has become such a big deal. And now Columbia University, they're advising students who are not American citizens not to speak out on controversial political issues because immigration could detain them, and there's nothing Columbia says that they can do about it. This has become a real rallying cry for the sort of anti-Trump movement. It draws this very direct line between the encampment protests and anti-Trump protesting, right? So basically, if you're for defending this particular guy, Khalil, then you are anti-Trump. You see how it's sort of aligning. And what's been kind of what my column was
There's
about.
There's a zero-sum game of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the friend of my enemy is my enemy and my friends, all that it's that. And it's what you're trying to get at is there's a lot more nuance to it.
Well, what I was trying to get at in my column was that even if you did not support the mission of the encampment protests, or at least even if you didn't support all of the mission of the encampment protests, and even if you agree that campus anti-Semitism exists and is a problem, you still should be wary of the idea that the Trump administration is going to, you should be wary of rounding up immigrants for wrongthink, basically, or people on green cards or any type of visa for wrongthink. And if you're a defender of free speech, which is a really important thing, especially in the United States with the First Amendment, then you should be worked up. The problem is that's never how it plays out. It's always like, well, this guy sucks. So, I don't want to say never. There are people who are saying the encampment protests had issues and this guy shouldn't be just deported without due process. There are, I should say, like quite a few Jews. I think that is probably like I would imagine that is what most American Jews think. But it gets very sidelined as a position because it's either like, oh no, you're with him. And then like there's you see in a news story reporting on this, it's like a photo of a rally and everybody's wearing a keffiyeh because that's who's supporting him, understandably so. But at the same time, like I had, and I will talk about what they were, some serious issues with the encampment protests. And I don't think that deporting people who have a green card because they have the wrong politics is necessarily the wisest thing. Yeah. And I also think this all has implications for Jews that we will get to.
Is there something that would be universally agreed upon that somebody should be deported if they're not a citizen, some activity without necessarily a due process? Or, I mean, if the person was directly involved in terrorism, would everybody agree? Or
I would go with rule of law, and I'm not a lawyer. So okay. What I would say is the law should be abided by. Whatever that law is should be abided by. If it needs to change, it should change via the legal system, right? So I'm not an expert on this
sure.
sort of thing.
Let me put it this way then. Are there people who are, are there lawyers who are saying, you know what, in some cases we can, deport somebody without any sort of process? Have you seen any? Because I haven't seen anybody who goes and says there's actually some cases where you should do this.
I didn't click on it, but I saw a headline that I may have been in the New Republic. It was definitely a left-wing headline that was saying like that the tragedy of this is that it is actually all happening legally. So I think that case may exist, that what's happening is within like there's some sort of loophole or whatever, like that maybe it is legal, but still bad. Like that is a possibility.
Okay. But most people agree that even if there was a legal way around this, it's not a good idea unless you are an extreme right thinker.
I think so.
Yeah. So what I see the general consensus is that the people that think that this is a good thing that is happening are being told by the people who think this is a bad thing that is happening. You think this is good, but it could just as easily be you. Right. And the specific example that I've seen pointed out was that this exact type of thing was happening to Jews who were totally innocent. But in the 50s, with the communist scare, there were a lot of Jews that were rounded up and victims of this same sort of process because they were suspected of being communist or were unwilling to hand over names of people that might be communist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea is that as soon as this action comes for people on your side, you're not going to like this, so don't do this ever.
Yeah, so I have seen this as well, and while there's truth to that, I don't think that's really the strongest Jewish case for being concerned now. I think there is a stronger one, which becomes very apparent if you just think about who Trump is and how he operates and have a dose of cynicism. And it goes like this. Most American Jews did not vote for Trump. This isn't about what I think most American Jews should have done. I did not vote for Trump. I also am stating a fact, though, about like exit polling. Trump is very big into loyalty, into, promoting the people who fawn over him, screwing over the people he feels disloyal to him. The idea that Trump is really has the victims of anti-Semitism are like the main people he's concerned about in this world strikes me as unlikely. It seems more likely that he would be at the very least amenable to screwing over Jews, which is, I think, what's happening here. And there are kind of like specific reasons why and kind of more zoomed out reasons why. The specific reason why is, what were the campus encampment protests? How did they seem until this happened? It seemed like a bunch of people, some students, some kind of hangers-on activists, whatever, making a ruckus, being annoying, being rude to Jews and threatening to Jews on college campuses. What do encampment protests, how are they represented now? By this heroic figure, this modern day Dreyfus, who's, at the center of this completely unfair action by the Trump administration. People are rallying behind him, saying to free him and so forth. The encampment protests now look like this extremely noble anti-Trump cause. And it looks like Jews, like this was all happening at the behest of Jews, like Jews made him do it. A kind of like, look what you made me do, Jews. You made me do this thing, right? So that's one aspect of it. The other reason I'm suspicious gets at something, I don't want to go too much into that here because it's a little bit off topic, but like he's doing the same thing. Trump is doing the same thing with women and with feminism and claiming to be kind of the great ally of women when I suspect that is not the case. That I wrote about for the Globe and Mail. I'm not going to go into it in detail here, but it does seem like he has this playbook where he names some group of people who are not by and large his supporters, says he's doing X as a way of, helping that group of people when he is in fact doing more of a like divide and conquer thing where he's not helping.
I don't think that the people that follow Trump have a dose of cynicism. So that's the first thing. I also don't think that they ever stop to think that he's ever not going to be loyal to them because they are loyal to him. Right? There is this give and take that they are fiercely loyal. They don't ever think that he's ever going to betray them and be capricious, even though you and I might have a healthy dose of cynicism and recognize that that is absolutely not only likely, but, or possible, but very likely. And the relationship between Trump and the people that he is ostensibly doing this stuff for is that they are, like I said, they are loyal to him. He only cares about them. He sees them as true citizens. Everybody else is false. And it's not just about Judaism and the right and the left. It's about the feminism. He'll whatever he says, whenever he'll put in somebody as a woman in a head of an organization or in some other way, he'll say, you see, I'm a feminist too, but he doesn't use that term in the same way that we use it. He is working in a way that is basically saying, if you think like me, then you are an American worth protecting. And if you don't, you are not. Right. And the people that follow him are also in that same sort of mindset. And they also don't think that they will ever leave power. Right. They assume that in 4 years, there will be somebody else, either Trump himself and, break the law and go ahead and become the president for another 4 years beyond that. Or that his son will do it or somebody else of his ilk, and it will all go forward. And it doesn't matter. We're here to get rid of the non-American things that we don't like. Right. And so in that sense, they have no problem with what he's doing, and they're not going to go and say, well, he might come for me someday, because he's never going to come for me. I think like him, and that's all that matters.
Well, so what do you make of this way that this particular maneuver kind of posits that, like, if you're like that, there's on the one hand the Jewish side of stuff, and on the other hand, the anti-Trump, like it kind of positions...
There is no Jewish side for Trump.
No,
right?
but I'm saying
even on
for
the
Jews,
left,
like where do you think this leaves Jews?
So the same sort of thing. The fact is that as a community, we have the same level of polarization. The people on the left, right, don't recognize, I'm not, this is an exaggeration. I don't really mean this literally, so don't come after me. But a lot of the people on the left, and I would say even the majority of people that are Jews on the left that are thinking as leftists, don't recognize the Jewishness of the people on the right. When they go and say anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, they're like, you are no longer part of the people that I am part of. When I defend Jews and Judaism, you're not in there. And the same thing happens on the right. If you are an anti-Zionist, you are not part of my camp, and I'm not going to think about you. I'm only going to work for my things. There is no unified voice anymore. It has become this thing, and this is a great example of the polarization.
Well, it's interesting you say polarization, because I think actual Jews are not necessarily all that polarized. I think the problem that happens when I'm reading about this topic, I'm reading about, on the one hand, there are the people who are, protesting in their kafia against this particular action. And then on the other hand, there's like some group, Jewish alumni of Columbia, that's some like new group. But like our most, and this gets to something you talk about a lot on Bonjour Chai, but like there's what communal organizations say, or including newly formed ones. And then there's like what most actual Jews think. And I have trouble believing that that the actual Jewish population in the United States is divided between thinking it's great that this guy may get deported and thinking it's terrible that he may get deported because Israel should be wiped off the map anyway. Like, I think there is a middle ground position that's probably the most numerous. That is. Can
you articulate that middle ground position?
Absolutely. So yes, that basically, so here's the issue with the encampments. And I think here's where I want to talk about like what specifically struck me as troubling about them. Obviously, the war itself, lots to protest about. What happened with the encampments was there had been this norm at American universities, but with a certain amount of extension, at least in principle, if not, a lot of the things are different in Canada, but not all. This idea that universities should be a safe space for members of marginalized groups, right? This had been this principle that had really been dominant in the last decade or so, right? Then the encampments...
I'm not sure I agree, but go on.
Okay. Well, there had been much discussion of safe spaces, of like campus materials, university pamphlets and stuff would talk about all the different affinity groups, all the different ways that the university or college is inclusive of people of different backgrounds, all of this, right? Sensitivity, microaggressions, a lot of campus op-eds about microaggressions, things like this. That had been the dominant culture, perhaps not on like a religious campus, but like on secular campuses, right? That have a lot of progressive faculty and students. And then what the encampments showed was that this whole sort of sensitivity apparatus did not extend to Jews. And I'm not saying it ever should have existed to begin with, but I'm saying it did exist and did not extend to Jews.
Okay, so on those points, first of all, to somebody who's, and I don't agree with this, I'm just playing devil's advocate, to the person on the right, the words like say college being a safe space and about inclusivity and all of that, those are all coded left words, right? This is where the roots of the right saying that the academia is all in the toilet for, because of the left has screwed it all up. They are all pointing out these things that you are calling out, that colleges were a safe space. The fact that colleges were a safe space for everybody but the Jews is because the left wants to take the Jewish community and place them in the white camp, whereas the Jews see themselves, many of them, as the minority camp. And that's the tension there. And when they say Jews, they don't want to have those safe spaces left for Jews on college campuses, it's not that they are making a small group of them into targets and saying, well, you're a minority and you don't deserve these rights. It's of the majority of people that are white, the people that are Jews are the people that we don't like, the same way that we don't like, oil barons, and we don't like, whatever, right-wing tech giants, even though they are white. The idea of Jew is just one other segment of the white population.
I mean, I do think it's important what you're bringing up about like the sort of general, like what's been so fascinating to me about, upsetting, but also interesting as like something to discuss for us is like Trump is now leading the American branch of what is at least across the English speaking world, seemingly a move to defund higher education, right? Universities are losing a lot of funding, also in Canada. And what's interesting in how it's playing out in the US is that it is happening in the name of helping Jews. And it boggles the mind, I find, just the idea that like this higher education in the US has been such an important thing for Jews. And even though, yes, the campus encampment protests have not been a uniformly positive experience for Jewish students, even though I can attest that what is taught in seminars is not always what is the most pro-Jewish stance of things. Knowledge, learning, meritocracy, whatever you want to call it, all of this has been very much like associated with a place that has been kind of, in the non-politicized sense, a safe space for Jews. And the idea that in the name of helping Jews, you're going to get rid of higher education just seems bizarre, that that's what it's come to. And also not like something that most Jews demographically would support.
Do they want to get rid of higher education, or do they just want to get rid of certain segments or certain aspects of higher education?
Well, the defunding of like huge amounts of scientific research suggests that this is not just about defunding Africana Studies Department.
Yeah. So, I mean, my suspicion, my hunch is that, you know, a guy like Elon Musk, who's defunding science left and right now, isn't saying that like, and it's incredibly small-minded, and I'll say this why in a second, but he's not saying that science itself is bad. He's just saying that the government shouldn't be in the business of basic science. And if you pressed him on what should happen, then he'd be like, well, we should privatize it and like let the corporations who might stand to make money and let the market decide what science is needed and what science isn't needed. The problem is that there's so much basic science that everything relies on that would never get funded because it doesn't have a direct commercial interest. And that's the role of government, is to go and say, hey, nobody's going to fund this, but this is important because it's going to drive other things eventually. Well, then we are going to go ahead and do it. And that is, you know, why the government funds basic science or academia or whatever it is that's going to happen. So in that sense, you know, Musk and Trump aren't saying that they want to defund, you know, all of this like science research. They're just saying, let the schools do their thing. You want to be a lefty school? Great. We're just not going to, we'll make it like you're going to do your thing. We're not going to make it illegal for that to happen. We just want more right-wing schools, or we just want more right-wing coverage where public schools are going to be publicized. And that's there. And I don't agree with it, but like I can see the through line to why they're thinking what they're thinking. I don't like it. I disagree, and I think it's wrong, you know, headed, as I'm saying. The thing that interests me, and I'm curious about this because you said something at the beginning there that Trump is doing this ostensibly to help the Jewish community.
Well, he's claiming that he's fighting anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it occurs to me that I don't think Trump would do that if he or the right saw the Jews as a minority either. If they were a protected minority class, Trump would say whatever. Trump also sees Jews as white. Okay,
so here's an interesting...
You know, did it occur to you that, like, please?
Yes, I have an answer to this that's pretty concrete, which is a headline from the Forward: Trump guts Department of Education, slashing office handling anti-Semitism complaints. Okay, that's one. Another is that in his quest to get rid of awareness days and weeks and months and so forth, like in law, they're not recognizing Holocaust awareness either. So it strikes me that this is all like, and they're getting, and you know, like it's not as if when universities the funding's gone, only Jewish studies remains. Like, no, obviously that's not how it's going to play out. I don't think this is about Trump thinking Jews are white. First of all, I think he probably, as a practical matter, thinks that Jared Kushner is a white man, but there's no consistency. I think this is reading too much consistency into it. I think he is going to defund the office of getting rid of anti-Semitism as well, right?
I probably true, but he'll say, you know, and if pressed, I'm trying to put words in his mouth. Maybe that's a straw man. Maybe it's not. I don't know, but it's not a hard stretch to hear Trump say, well, I guess sometimes you have to lose a couple of things and we'll make up for it in other ways, but we don't want a white privilege day. We don't get a white privilege month or an awareness month or whatever it is. So we're getting rid of all of them. Right. And we're not going to get one, but you don't get one either, because we don't believe that, you know, we should be highlighting those things. You know, if the Holocaust was a terrible time for white people. Well, that's a thing that we're going to have to do because we don't get to celebrate the South and the Confederate states. They don't get celebrated. Well, the Holocaust doesn't get celebrated either, right? White stuff that happened in the past that you don't like, that we don't like.
The Holocaust doesn't get
acknowledged. I'm saying that like that.
Yeah.
This is where I'm trying to get at is that like it all goes away, right? You want it all to go away. Well, this is what happens when it all goes away.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is like I wouldn't assume that this is like I think there's partial truth to what you're saying, which is that in the omni-cause alignments, like at that level of things, there's a way that, as we've been talking about for now more than a year, fighting anti-Semitism has become right-wing coded, despite actual Jews not being on the whole right-wing. And I think this is of a piece with that. So I guess like in that sense, it makes sense that that would be like the one identity cause he would kind of glom onto. The fight against anti-Semitism, like forget about the fight against racism, forget about the fight against transphobia, certainly, whatever. But no, he's going to focus on the fight against anti-Semitism because that's the one identity thing that has become right-wing coded. But then the other issue is that it has and it hasn't, right? Like there's still a far right that does not fight anti-Semitism and that is well woven into his administration. So that's another whole aspect.
Yeah. So the analog to that, the way that I would see it, and I think it's a very close correlation. It's not direct, but like if you think about, and you've mentioned this to me in the past, right? Well, the gay thing has been solved, right? The right has adopted that. Nobody is anti-gay on the right. And
I said this.
You have said this to me.
I have said that nobody is anti-gay on the right.
Not nobody, but
really?
like it's the way that you've said, like there are gays, you know, that are the LGB movement is on the right, and they've accepted that this is. I've heard this from you. Correct me, help me figure out what are the precisely.
I think if I could say what it is, I think on this, I think what has happened is if you say currently today that you are for gay rights. And not but forget the Q, forget the T, you're just for the LGB. That is a kind of right-wing coded thing.
Sure.
Do I think that the actual right wing is made up of gender critical British feminists? I do not.
No, but do you think that there are people who say, well, you know, Barry Weiss, she's clearly one of us. Right. But she's gay, so that's fine. And there are definitely gays within our groups, and there are gays that are Republicans, and then that's fine. It's no big deal. Right. And part of that, if you ask me, is because many gays code as white. And yet,
many people who are trans are also white. I don't really.
Hold on. And yet, I'm just doing the LGB for now. Right.
Okay.
And yet the evangelical Christian world is still very like homophobic.
Well,
and yet they are all in the bag for Trump. So it's the same sort of thing where you have a group that is a large group that is anti a certain thing, even though the larger, bigger group of right-wing and Republicans and whatever might be inclusive of that. So you have Jews who are part of the Republican party of tent, and yet you still have hard right people that are anti-Semitic.
Sure. I also don't know if Barry Weiss is gay or bi, and it doesn't really matter for this question. But the point that I was going to say is Barry Weiss might seem right-wing to some, but Tucker Carlson is saying she's not really a right-winger and is, you know, like I think there are a lot of things happening at the same time. And I think there is a strain in MAGA land that is very much old school against all the people that conservatives ever would have been against. I don't think that has disappeared. I don't think that there's some whole new group of people that have been absorbed in and are fine. I think there's this sort of vibe shift towards celebrating overt bigotry has revived a lot of that kind of, including against groups that demographically are members of the Republican Party.
Look, it's messy. I don't think that it's not. I'm not denying that it isn't. I can see why certain things get said and why certain people hold these views, no matter how complicated, or wackadoodle it comes off as. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just trying to make sense of it for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the aspect of this that concerns me is, I mean, apart from the like democracy should continue and so forth level, is just like, I don't think this is good for Jews, not because of some kind of abstract thing to do with the 1950s and communism, but rather to do with this very concrete thing where all of a sudden being Jewish and concerned about anti-Semitism, as many Jews are, suddenly puts you in this kind of like weird political limbo where you're not for Trump for all sorts of other reasons, and yet, you know, he's the one who's claiming to be on your side and everybody who's against him is claiming to be on the other side. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it puts Jews in a kind of awkward spot politically. I would say, however, that this kind of gives an opportunity for Canadian Jews to turn away from Trump all that much more.
Yeah.
Potentially.
So first of all, I only wish that more Jews were aware of this cognitive dissonance, of like how tough a spot we are in because of this two sides, and like both sides, you know, we're either on one or the other, and there's the fighting anti-Semitism, and this person claims they're on the side. Because from what I see, and it's just my observations, the people that are in for Trump don't see this complexity. They're like, I don't care of whatever else he's doing. It might be bad, but as long as he's good for the Jews, I'm on Team Trump. And the people who are on the other side will see everything else and will say, it doesn't matter that he's fighting anti-Semitism, he's still evil. And I think that you are right, that we are in a better position to be rejecting Trump. I think that Canada is in a great moment of Trump rejection right now. We are going to very shortly have a new prime minister, Mark Carney. He seems like it's going to be good for the country. I think we can we can talk about him another time in another episode. But this anti-Trumpness within the Jewish community, I find it very, very hard to go away. We spoke about this a few weeks ago when we were talking about the tariffs, and I had pointed out that somebody on the CJN Daily, our sister podcast with Ellen Besner, was talking about how they were a food importer, and it was these tariffs were going to absolutely destroy his business, especially in the weeks leading up to Passover. And he goes, and yet I still would vote for Trump in a heartbeat because he's so good for Israel.
Mm-hmm. I hope he is an outlier.
In my experience, he is not.
Okay.
There are many people that I've spoken to who have said, yeah, you know
people
what?
People in Canada.
No, people in the US.
Okay.
Yeah,
but I'm saying in Canada, I think.
I would hope so.
Different than in the US. I think the sentiments regarding Trump in Canada are different in Canada for obvious reasons.
Well, especially now with, you know, Trump, this, as I've said, the single best thing to happen to the Liberal Party in the past 2 years is the election of Donald Trump and his decision to say Canada's going to be the 51st state. This has mobilized an entire nation behind the party that is not for Trump, like Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party, which is remarkable. And I cannot wait to see how this shakes out in the next few months, if there's going to be a snap election to catch this momentum or not. I'm not saying that Carney is the overwhelming victor or potential victor in this upcoming election. I'm just saying that there's a lot of momentum shift. And as we have seen in previous elections in recent memory, in Canada and the US, momentum counts for a lot when it comes to elections. Like, do you think that the nuance could actually be translated, and how so? Like, how do you get somebody to like wrap their mind around the fact, like, suppose you meet somebody and they tell you exactly that this Trump is horrible for my business. He's doing something misguided with these tariffs. It's not going to be great. Yet he's so good for Israel that I am still going to vote for him. I
would assume that this is somebody who has such different political views than I do that I can share what mine are, and they're probably not going to budge. Yeah. I mean, that's, yeah.
And what do you say to the people who are on the left who can't like possibly stomach anything that he's doing, even if it's going to benefit them in terms of fighting anti-Semitism?
But I don't think, but what is he do? I think I am that person. I mean, I don't think, but what is he doing to fight anti-Semitism? No, I think it's all like,
it's words, it's talk. Yeah, absolutely. But for his followers, the talk is all that matters. So you and I can see through it, but there are people like, suppose he actually does do something to fight anti-Semitism.
But how? I mean, I guess
I don't know. I'm saying suppose he follows through on something that's just talk.
I mean, so here is where, okay, so I can talk about, this was what I wrote that column on about women stuff and Trump.
Women stuff.
A
column by Phoebe Maltzbovy.
Yeah, right. Basically, Trump did an executive order, basically right when he went into office, defining women as biologically female. Mm-hmm. And this had a bunch of implications. He also did other executive orders that are kind of related. And the measures themselves are things that polling has shown even most Democrats are in favor of. So even mm-hmm. the people who didn't vote for him largely share these policy positions. Do I think he is helping women? I don't think so. Like I think there are things that could be materially done for women that have nothing to do with trans women in sports, even if polling shows that most Americans don't think trans women should play in women's sports. I don't think that is like Trump is a feminist. I don't think that's how it works. So I think he basically just has a playbook. I think he has a way he approaches politics with these pretexts where he takes some position that a lot of people hold and uses it as a pretext to just take a wrecking ball to whatever he's going to take a wrecking ball to next.
Can we chalk it up to the people on the left saying, well, I guess a broken clock is right at least 2 times a day?
I don't object to anybody whose whatever pet issue Trump has fallen on the correct side of, in their view, saying having the broken clock is right twice a day approach to Trump. I think fine, that seems reasonable. What I object to is when people treat it not like a broken clock, but say, no, actually the clock works.
Okay, well, on that note, let us move on to Nachas right after this. Phoebe, do you have a Nachas? Do you have a Bregas?
I think I actually have a Nachas.
Woo!
I'm going to Nachas my favorite supermarket in Toronto. Fiesta
Wait, let me
Farms.
guess.
Oh,
I would never have guessed. I don't know.
What were you going to guess?
Like No Frills, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, I know it well. But no. My favorite supermarket in Toronto is Fiesta Farms. I can't quite how do I describe Fiesta Farms? For Americans who are doubtless listening in great numbers, it's kind of like Wegmans. Basically, it's a non-chain but all-purpose supermarket. So it's not a gourmet boutique. It has some gourmet items. It has some non-gourmet items. It's like very traditional supermarket, but an independently run one. So it's not part of the whole no frills, Loblaws thing. And they have just gone all out with the Canadian patriotism, such that there are like Canadian flags everywhere. Everything's marked as, if it's made in Canada, it says made in Canada with a little flag. It's really like making it easier for you to shop Canadian and so forth. And while I did not only buy Canadian items on my grocery trip, it did feel like a kind of nice coming together patriotic moment, and I enjoyed being able to do this in a supermarket that is not like when there were these initial buy Canadian guides that were like shop at Loblaws and buy the Loblaws brand. It's like, okay. I mean, you do that because you have to, but whatever. This seems a little bit supporting a business I like and also supporting Canada at the same time. So my nachas was my enjoyment of the Fiesta Farms trip. My broigus is the process of getting groceries back by subway and streetcar from a supermarket, which is annoying.
Do you not have a granny cart? Or is it ageist to say granny cart?
I know what you mean, but the thing is, no, I don't, because I'm still in the stroller era, so things tend to go under a stroller.
What I'm confused about, and I live in a country that is changing names like Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. Mm-hmm. This word fiesta is neither English nor French. Is there no discussion of this? They should go and say we are renaming ourselves to be.
But it's not Mexico we've got the beef with.
Maybe it's about the multiculturalism, and we are okay with all of that.
I mean, but you are making me think that there was a moment in the 2010s when this could have been seen as cultural appropriation, and for all I know, it was. But we're not there now, and in this moment, my nachas is for the patriotic grocery shopping at Fiesta Farms. What have you got?
I saw a news piece today in the JTA. I had heard some inklings about it, but it was accompanied by a photograph, and I'm realizing that it's not just a one-off thing, but a lot of people are doing this, or a lot of children are doing this. Apparently, it has become a thing in Israel this year to dress up like Batman for Purim. And this is in honor and memory of Ariel Bibas, who was a big fan of Batman. And when at first, I had to wrap my head around that. I'm like, is that a cool thing? Is that a thing? Is that nice that there are all these kids dressing up as Batman for Purim to honor his memory? And then I was like, yeah, 100%. I was really down with it after about 20 seconds of thinking. And so I would like to make my nachas the general idea that all of these kids are dressing up like Batman this year for Purim in order to honor that memory, because I think that's going to stay with them for a long time. And in 20 years, we're going to hear these stories of oh, you remember that year in 2025 when everybody dressed up as Batman? It's going to become a nice memory. That's my nachas.
Well, I hope there is society in 20 years.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending March 15th, Shabbat Parshat Ki Tisa. The show is produced by Michael Freeman, edited by Zach Hoffman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is one of the best ways we get new listeners. And as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.